Welcome to the Travis Masterbone podcast. I am your host, Travis Masterbone, talking some shit to impact your life. This is episode 9, titled Mushrooms and Solipsism. Mushrooms. What are they? How do they work? And we're not talking about the mushrooms you eat as a side for dinner or put on your pizza. We are talking about specifically magic mushrooms. Mushrooms are a fungus, and they definitely are a magic fungus. I'd tell you that much. I took mushrooms for the first time about a little over 10 years now. I did it 3 times back in high school, and we are going to be talking about psychedelic mushrooms. Psychedelics, known as hallucinogens, are a class of psychoactive substances that produce changes in perception, mood, and cognitive processes, to say the least. I was blown away. Little Travis didn't know what to do with it. And you have these expectations of it, and they really do strip your reality from you. You expect leprechauns, unicorns, and some Alice in Wonderland type shit, but it's a whole different type of crazy that you experience. But it always ends up being beautiful. But it made me want to do a podcast about it today. Let's talk a little bit about psilocybin. That is a chemical compound that is in the caps and stems of mushrooms, produced by more than 200 species of fungi. And when we ingest this, our body converts this biologically inactive compound of psilocybin into psilocin. And this is what creates these psychedelic mind-altering effects. And it's pretty mind-blowing, to be honest. I'm going to do my best to describe it a little bit, and I will tap back into it throughout this episode on my experiences with it, with mushrooms. And one thing's for certain, though, I think everyone should try it at least once in their life or intermittently every year, every 5 years, 10 years, whatever, just to kind of escape reality a little bit and really strip away your anxiety and relinquish your control. That always seems to be the end result when I come off of them, which is probably why they are being tested and used for therapeutics and have been around for years, centuries, in so many different cultures and societies all over the world for ceremonial purposes, spiritual purposes, and therapeutic purposes. So why not explore it? Give it a shot yourself. It's like riding a roller coaster. I can do my best to describe things. I just recently watched a documentary. I think it's called How to Change Your Mind on Netflix, episode 2. And I'm listening to these cancer patients, these subjects who take the mushrooms, and when they're describing their trips, they sound like lunatics, right? From the surface. But when you're really on them, it's so real. And it's very difficult to describe, so we do our best to describe it. And so, for example, with me, I just recently did it again about a couple weeks ago or so. And it's just describing colors, like they are just different. They vibrate and kind of fade in and out. They're just very different. Your own hands look different. Your phone looks different. And things are a bit more wavy and vibrant, and you feel different. There's like a little bit of euphoria. There's a little bit of panic. There's a little bit of like kind of like glitches, and we'll get into all that in a little bit. But for the most part, that's what I was experiencing a lot. Like this dog, my buddy's dog, just kind of felt like my spirit animal. And I swear there'd be moments I'd look one way and then look another, and the dog would glitch across the room and be here and then be over here in a different position. It was very funky. Along with all that, watching Bill Burr was just absolutely hilarious, but everything was just definitely amplified in regards to your senses. I didn't see any leprechauns, so don't expect that. But for the most part, it's definitely one hell of an experience, and I highly recommend it. And there's just so much to take away from it. But today I wanted to talk about something in particular that I kind of discovered when I was on it, and it's kind of lingering with me right now. It is the philosophical theory of solipsism. I don't know why it decided to pop in my head. I remember doing some research about this theory years ago and thinking it was absolutely loony-toony. But then, after my recent mushroom trip, I decided to revisit it because there was a moment on my trip when I went out to the pool and my buddy and the dog disappeared from my vision. I didn't know where they went. And I had the thought in my head, how do I know that they truly exist if I don't see them? And that's going to be the foundational concept or principle when it comes to solipsism. And so, what is solipsism? Solipsism is the philosophical theory that proposes that the self is the only thing to be known or verified to exist. So, basically, everything outside of myself, the stars, the clouds, the mountains, the buildings, these walls and clothes on my body, this computer, this microphone, it's all an illusion created by my conscious, right? Like a projection, right? And so that's the foundation of it. And it does sound crazy, but nonetheless, this theory has lingered throughout the centuries by some of the smartest thinkers and philosophers of our time, and I'll be bringing them up throughout this episode. But it has definitely been debated, this topic of solipsism, and plenty of philosophers both feel that it's absurd and others believe that it's the profound truth. And it goes as far back as 420 BCE. Ancient Greek philosopher Protagoras. He is known for the quote, "Man is the measure of all things," end quote. And his belief was the individual perception of reality is the only truth. And I kind of resonate with that. This vision of mine, the lens of my brain throughout my eyeballs and everything I see right now in front of me, that for sure I know is real. I know I am experiencing something. And so the great and well-known philosopher Plato opposed of this ideal and basically diagnosed this theory or this statement of Protagoras, that Protagoras is saying there is no objective truth. So it's like objectivity versus relativism. And so with solipsism, the belief that holds firm is that there are no truths, only perceptions. And so it's like when a person makes a judgment about a certain thing, whether that judgment's good or bad or beautiful or unjust, that person will differ from other people's judgments because their experience has been different. And so this is the concept of individual relativity. So relativism is a family of philosophical views that deny claims to objectivity within a particular domain and assert that valuations in that domain are relative to the perspective of an observer or the context in which they are assessed. All right, and this carries forward into the 17th century. So this just keeps coming up. It's a conflict between objectivity and relativism. And French philosopher René Descartes, not sure if he was specifically a believer in solipsism, but he is known for the famous quote, maybe you've heard of it, "I think, therefore I am." And what Descartes says is the only thing he truly knows is that he was a thinking, conscious being. Everything else externally could be dismissed altogether. And it's very fascinating. And again, it aligns with, I remember hearing about this Taoist philosopher, and it's like the butterfly dream theory or whatever that he uncovered or decided to kind of put together to explain that how do we know that we're in a dream or if we're in reality. So it's the butterfly dream. So his name is Shuangzhu, and basically what happened was he was asleep, dreaming of a butterfly, and then he woke up and he wondered if in actual reality he was the butterfly dreaming that he was Shuang Zhu. Okay, so it gets into some real Matrix shit. And I'm really just mentioning this because this is genuinely how I felt when I was on mushrooms tripping. I was really thinking about this exact concept, like if I was all alone and I was really questioning my reality around me and if I was in a simulation, some Black Mirror shit, right? And so with that Shuang Zhu statement, if he was a butterfly dreaming that he was him, the latter statement seems insane, but there isn't a definitive way to prove its falsity. All we know is that we have a consciousness that is capable of perception. And so if you can't prove its falsity, for me it's on the table. I'm not going to die on the hill with this solipsistic view. I'm just basically spouting out loud and ranting and opening the kimono for you to kind of dig deeper and further. And if you eat mushrooms, maybe you feel the same way and want to connect the dots there, and we can go from there. But for the most part, back to it, there's no way with 100% certainty that anything exists outside of our minds. You may have heard of the tree example. The tree in the forest falls. If no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? Well, let's take it a step further. If no one's there to even see it, is it even there? Right? And so this is where it goes back to that everything is an illusion thing. While we are dreaming, do we consciously know we are within the dream and that we are sleeping? And how can we truly tell the difference from the dream state and reality? And so it does get deep and it's fun to poke at. But these mushrooms and then these philosophers, they really stimulated me to further question my assumptions of reality and my true place in it. I feel like ever since I was little, I always questioned things. My dad always said you had questions all the time, every day. I was curious. I still am. And this is probably why I'm even making this damn podcast. But for the most part, I always wanted to test the limits of my consciousness, whether I was conscious of it or not when I was younger. But now I definitely am. And the mushrooms just kind of amplified it for me in a very odd and, again, beautiful way. And so a big principle that kind of supports solipsism and how you can't prove its falsity is the question of do other human beings have an independent, conscious reality akin to my own? Right? And this is very important, right? And when I think about this is what we call the problem of other minds, right? We can't hop into other people's minds and see if they see and perceive the world synonymously as I do. And that's the big roadblock, right? And why we can't prove its falsity. German philosopher Immanuel Kant, he concerned himself with the relationship between object and subject. And this is a great quote. Quote, "Things which we see are not by themselves what we see. It remains completely unknown to us by what the objects may be by themselves and apart from the receptivity of our senses. We know nothing but our manner of perceiving them," end quote. And so Immanuel Kant, along with the philosopher that developed the idea of subjective idealism, and this guy is George Berkeley. So they both were pretty much very concerned with this relationship between object and subject. And it's very much related to solipsism. And again, I'm just connecting the dots that I just really felt this way when I was on mushrooms. So moving forward here, what is subjective idealism? That is a philosophy based on the premise that nothing exists except minds and spirits and their perceptions or ideas. And this is considered, quote unquote, extreme. I don't know if it's extreme. Have we ever seen anything that is actually exterior to our perception? No. So we will never know if things we perceive exist absolutely without us perceiving it. Absolutely. That's an important word in my opinion. And so if so, then it's on the table for me, right? And so Berkeley goes a little deeper. He has an expression, I'm going to butcher this, but it's called esse est percipi, and it means to be is to be perceived. And so to be, from the perspective of the object, means to be perceived. To be, through the subject, means to perceive. So there's this relationship here. And it's pretty fascinating overall. And hopefully this can trigger a little bit more, not only imagination, but curiosity of your own to look up some of these philosophers I've named and dig a little bit deeper into solipsism. Again, I'm not dying on the hill that it's all just through my lens. Everyone is an avatar. This is like some Truman Show-esque thing going on here, and no one else is actually real, but it is really impossible to hop in other people's minds and know for sure that they're experiencing what I'm experiencing. And I just really felt that way when I was tripping out with my buddy in that moment, right? And then it just kind of carried on throughout the trip and back into reality. It doesn't mean that I felt alienated in any way or isolated, knowing that I was the only one, whether that's true or not. So I guess some potential consequences that can arise, for a second you do feel crazy. And at times, like even right now when I'm ranting, like I do question like, oh, do I sound crazy? Because you're really conflicting a couple of ideas and trying to put together this potential explanation to life. It's very complicated. Occam's razor can go right out the door, in my opinion. There is no simple answer to this. We're exploring and trying to figure it out. And so I guess some consequences of solipsism could potentially be like, all right, well, if people aren't real in the way that I believe is real, then, maybe you become less empathetic. Maybe you feel isolated. And again, it makes you feel crazy just to be terrified to be alone. But for me, like I feel it a little bit, but for the most part, once I come down off of the mushrooms and I really think about solipsism, I almost feel a little bit of relief, like anxiety and worry just kind of dissipate. Even if I am the only one, it doesn't necessarily mean that I gotta act like a maniac or a dick. I could still be very empathetic, and that's always the way I become when I come down from these trips. But either way, true or not, there's still questions that need to be answered if you do believe in solipsism full blown. If this is a simulated reality, who's doing it? What's doing it? If it is my mind, then what exactly is my mind? When I was tripping, I looked at my hands. They looked pixelated. The hallways looked kind of pixelated. When the dog was moving around, it was very glitchy, like a computer program, and it was just very odd. And I had shared experiences, like shared hallucinations with my buddy. How is that even possible? It was very trippy. But if this is some type of computer program, where does the simulation come from? And are these random projections that are coming from my mind? And then, of course, the question still remains. Why? And what is my role in this? So solipsism isn't the end-all, be-all, because you're still left with questioning your purpose. You don't escape that question. And so in regards to like free will and determinism, I think for the most part, while you're on the mushrooms, I'm going to list off a few tips that end this to further support how you let go of what you can't control. But a determinist person believes we have no control of anything. We don't self-author anything. And so I think determinists, they could be on board a little bit with this solipsistic view of life and mushrooms, because you really do see, like, I can't control these hallucinations. I can't control the way I feel. I can't control how all my senses are just firing right now and how my brain is kind of glitching, so to speak. But at the same time, I recognize this, and I kind of chose in that moment to just let it go and just set sail and ride the waves. It felt like free will, that's for sure. So the illusion of free will could definitely be at play as well. I'm not picking sides or anything. I just think free will, illusion of free will, or determinism, they all still kind of can have a place with a solipsistic philosophy. It doesn't pick or choose, in my opinion. But yeah, moral of the story is, it's a lot to think about. I've been thinking about this stuff probably my whole life. But again, the mushrooms kind of amplified it and really put it in perspective. And you probably could understand this podcast episode a bit more in depth and with more clarity if you were to have eaten mushrooms. And if you are listening and you have eaten mushrooms, whether recently or any time in your life, let me know if I'm on point or if I'm in need of a straitjacket. But to taper off here, I have a few tips on how to handle and experience mushrooms on your own. First and foremost, make sure you have a trustworthy source for the mushrooms. You know someone who has already eaten these mushrooms beforehand or grows them regularly. That is important so you don't get some bad mushrooms or over-the-top potent mushrooms. Number 2, in regards to potency, if you're new to it, please be conservative on how much you eat, because you do not know if you will blast off the Neptune with just half an eighth versus an eighth of mushrooms. So be conservative. When I was younger, 10 years ago, I took like half an eighth. Trust me, I was tripping balls and I had a great time. But if you eat too much, it could be very overwhelming, and I can imagine that being the key reason on how people really flip out, get nauseated, and have bad trips. So be conservative on that. Number 3, as I mentioned, set sail. Don't expect or project a shipwreck. If you hop on a flight, you are going to expect turbulence, right? Expect the turbulence, but don't imagine the fucking plane crashing, okay? And just enjoy it. And how you enjoy it is number 4, letting go, right? You won't be able to control your hallucinations, your perceptions, and the feelings. So really try to mentally prep yourself that you are going to let go and relinquish control to the best of your ability. And number 5, do it with the right people, right? Letting go and doing it with the right people really helps in how you set sail on this magical journey. Kind of sound like a hippie. And I guess for a 6th lesson, apply these lessons to the real world. Let's use that Taoist theory. Why not transfer it? What makes it any different on how you're trying to handle mushrooms versus the real world? In the real world, there's going to be turbulence as well. You're going to have to relinquish control as well. And, again, it's going to be slightly different in the sense like your senses really do become heightened when you come down. You become much more aware of your smell, your sight, your taste, just the breath in my lungs. Like the next day I was like, wow, I feel like I could just feel the oxygen and I could feel the expansion of my lungs. But most importantly, I just feel more empathetic. Even with the idea of this solipsism in my head, that they might be avatars, I still felt like I was listening to people a bit more in depth and with more curiosity, and putting myself in their shoes felt a little bit easier. And to me, that is a great, great thing. And it's probably why we're using mushrooms as therapeutics, because with cancer patients, every time they explained on that documentary how they felt after the trip, they worshipped it, glorified it, but they always mentioned how they were just not so afraid of death anymore. Like getting rid of the fear of death. Like, I think that's an amazing thing. how anxiety just peels away. It's a beautiful thing, especially if you're ticking towards the end of your life. Isn't this what we want? We want people to go away as pleasantly and as humanely as possible. And if we can conquer that mentally through, some mushroom psychedelic therapeutics without pharmaceuticals and all that crap, Western medicine, let's do it. Let's give it a shot. And I know this for certain. I relate to them when they talk about it. And it really does bring you down to earth. And I just can't promote it enough that people should at least give it a try so they could understand exactly what happens and not look at it like, wow, you're on drugs, you're a druggie. There's always different reactions when you tell people like, oh, I did mushrooms the other week or whatever. Misconceptions, to say the least. Hop on the roller coaster before you start judging and trying to interpret what the ride is going to be like. And so anyways, that is just my own subjective experience and diagnosis of mushrooms and solipsism, no pun intended. Have at it. Dive a little deeper in, the research and background of mushrooms and the theory and philosophy of solipsism. I find it all fascinating, and I wanted to tie it into one episode since it was really all connected for me a couple weeks ago. Very intriguing and appealing, to say the least, and hopefully it is for you as well. Or at this point, you might think I need a fucking straitjacket. If so, I really don't give a shit. This is my podcast. Again, please like, share, subscribe, all that shit. And thank you for tuning in to the Travis Masterbone podcast. And I look forward to you tuning in next time. Farewell.